Hi, everyone. This is the Mediaspace Global Change Maker. Yeah, we are change makers, but this is the Global Networking Session January 2024 with 3 special guests. And this conversation is dedicated to advertising targeting. I would like to introduce you to 3 special guests today. This is a public part, so you will be able to follow the conversation on Mediaspace, LinkedIn, and Facebook. But after this panel session, we will close it and we will continue the member-to-member conversation on the Zoom link. So if you are going to join the conversation after the panel, please go to Mediaspace.global and to this event, and so you can join. So we've got Niki, Guillaume, and Luc. And I would like to ask first Niki to introduce yourself very briefly, and then we will move to the other speakers and then the conversation.
Thank you, Kinga. Hi, everyone. My name is Niki Chana. I'm Client Success Lead over at Playground XYZ, which is attention-based technology. And I'm also one of the founding global board members of the Women in Programmatic Network. Lovely to see you all.
Thank you. Luc, please.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, Luc Taplin-McCallum here, Head of Agency Partnerships over at a business called Anonymised. And my background is taking new ad tech and martech products to market, 0 to 1. So new technologies that enable brands and agencies to connect with consumers in new ways. Now I'm a business called Anonymised, which is a brand new, built from the ground up, cookieless solution that's built by privacy lawyers. So we're doing something new. We're doing something quite lofty, and we're helping brands connect with consumers without the use of cookies, of course.
Thank you, Luc. And Guillaume, please.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, so my name is Guillaume Kendall. I'm the founder of the Attention Exchange. The Attention Exchange is a business born out of fintech. In the finance world, you might use it yourselves. There's something called open banking. And open banking allows you to share your transaction data out of your bank to other regulated third parties. And we've taken that approach to hyper-target consumers with marketing who opt into sharing their data in order to hear from brands that are relevant to where they spend their money, not where they browse the web. So we're early on in our journey, but looking forward to this discussion very much.
Thank you, Guillaume. And I would like to start this conversation with a not so simple question. What do you think the key drivers of change are in digital advertising these days? Who is going to start?
I can start, if you like. Maybe I can use the analogy of, I guess, my own journey of deciding to sell my house and quit my job in order to provide an alternative to traditional media.
You are very committed.
Very committed. The reason was I was fed up actually with my attention constantly being distracted from the primary purpose of whatever I was browsing online, right? Whether you're on social media or searching on Google or whatever else, you're increasingly interrupted consistently by brands quite often actually that you're already a customer of and have purchased from, and it becomes increasingly frustrating. I've recently still on LinkedIn get adverts for Whoop, right? And I'm wearing my Whoop band, and if you saw my banking transactions, you'd see my monthly transaction every single month for over 18 months now to Whoop. And so you're distracting my primary purpose of being on LinkedIn for networking with an advert that's completely and utterly irrelevant. And so I hope that consumer frustration, ambivalence, distraction is going to drive brands to think differently about the way that they engage with the relevant consumers. And I think that's really, really important. We talked a little bit, Niki, you spoke earlier about doing what's right for the publisher and the brand, but I think it's important that we look at what we do right for the customer. And of course, that reaches big implications around privacy, around the data that we use, how we use their data. And with Gen Z now earning money, right? I was reading an article yesterday about millennials, and I am old. It's no longer really about us. Gen Z's here, and obviously they're the first digitally native generation, but they understand the value of their data. They certainly understand the value of their attention. And I think, and I hope that we're going to see a shift away from basically bombarding and frustrating someone to the point of distraction for attention and a new model. So, and of course, to the last point, privacy regulation. We're seeing online safety bills changing the way that brands necessarily will think about advertising on Facebook and TikTok and all these other platforms that might not be so healthy. Cookieless is coming, but will ultimately be replaced by something else, serverless or some other medium of getting your data in order to distract you. But with this increasing privacy regulation, iOS, ATT, all these things, eventually it will just become so hard. I hope it drives a more efficient model rather than a even less good model. Anyway, that's my piece on that.
Thank you. Niki.
Yeah, thank you. No, I'd like to definitely add to that. And I think your point's like totally, 100% right. We need to consider the user in the first place. But again, what's sort of driving the advertising experience is us working in the advertising media tech space. It's up to us to see how many times we bombard a user, let's say, and that's taking it back to the brand. It's taking it back to the technology or the publisher that's actually hosting that and reaching the user. Because as I previously mentioned, I've seen double ads on a page, I've seen clutter. And what are we doing as an industry to try and sort of mitigate any bad experiences, not only just for the user, but for the brand and publisher, as well as, the companies the technology-based companies that actually sit within our world. Now, to sort of really sort of navigate your way through that, there are sort of means and mediums that I think advertisers need to sort of or should be sort of like looking at, for instance, especially because we're about to go through one of the biggest shift in in sort of media history, let's say, with the cookies going away. So I think it's taking into consideration, obviously, the brand advertiser looking at the level of advertising, the message, the wastage, and understanding how we can actually make that experience better for all those that actually have a touch point in it. And that sort of comes back to brands wanting to link their activity to outcomes. So be it attention, be it linking attention to outcomes in that sort of respect. Also, you mentioned walled gardens, so like the social media platforms, YouTube, for instance. My sort of, not so much fear, because that's where users do live, but my sort of fear is that that's where most of the money, most of the revenue is going to be sort of shifted to, again, inundating users with repeat advertisements and things like that. And that's what we want to get away from. Gen Zs are making lots of money, but they're also very, very, very vocal. And they're a lot more, I'd say, knowledgeable when it comes to, switching off, let's say, if they want a personalized ad or not. But I think we're going through a scary but exciting sort of shift, and it's finally here after being pushed back how many years. So I just think, I think it's really important that we stay connected as much as we can and not sort of, I know it sounds cheesy, but not work in silos. And that goes back to an advertiser themselves, looking at social media activity display, and then you've got programmatic display, you've got branding, CTV, and the list is sort of endless there. So I think it's really important to sort of remove clutter and really showcase, how hard a brand, like the sort of budget, is working and ensuring that they're reaching the right people in a nice sort of timely manner.
Thank you, Niki. What's your view, Luke? What are the key drivers of change?
Happy to share. And by the way, I also get the Whoop ads everywhere I look. I'm Team Garmin, but I still get the Whoop ads anyway. The question is, what's the driver of change, right? And for me, the answer is quite simple. It's that the internet is becoming much more private and much more equitable. Quite simply that's the key driver of change. And yes, legislation over the past 10, 15, 20 years has urged us to move or transition in our ways of working, but regulation has made it physically harder, technically harder to execute what we do for day jobs, serve ads, connect to consumers, monetize audiences, right? So the internet becoming more private and equitable is the answer. I think from a consumer point of view, we are, as people, very aware of our data now and how important that is to brands. And then there's programs and documentaries, The Social Dilemma, There was one on Cambridge Analytica, right, about, I think it's called The Great Hack. So consumers, typical folk are very much aware of their data and how it's been garnered, what it's being used for, and the consequences of that. And that is a key change. That is a key driver of change for us. It's actually why I got into this space, by the way. I was involved in a hackathon with the United Nations last year with over IPG, and we were looking at data surveillance and data capitalism and how data is being garnered at a disproportionate rate and is then being used to exploit marginalized communities. So yeah, the short answer is the internet's becoming much more private. And for me, that's the greatest driver of change.
Thank you. You mentioned a couple of challenges already, so I would like to turn to this question. What do you think the key challenges are? And obviously we will move to the opportunities and solutions as well, but I would like to ask you about this. And this is basically important because we believe it's not possible to solve something that you don't precisely define. So I wonder what you believe the key challenges are for brands, for publishers, and everyone in between. Guillaume.
Data. It's data. To Luke's point, I think the cat's out the bag now. There's been a number of documentaries highlighting the way in which Meta and other platforms have been using your data at great lengths, even to the point of influencing potentially democratic outcomes or otherwise. It's really powerful stuff. And as we mentioned already, Gen Z, but they're the ones that are going to take the extra 30 seconds to say, do not opt in. I am turning these things off. I'm not interested in more personalized experience. And I think this comes back to the point I made about benefiting the user in some way and putting them at the center of the experience, is that if there is no direct benefit for the consumer to share their data in order to receive a more personalized message from a brand, they won't switch on. Right? Who wants more personalized advertising? In my view, coming from outside, I guess, is a relatively negative thing. People pay a premium to opt out of being advertised to. And it's strange to me that you think about other industries. If I paid you not to talk to me, then clearly I'm not interested in being spoken with. And yet the industry is a $600 billion market of getting that space in front of the consumer. So the data is really, really key, but the user experience is absolutely, I guess, an equal primary element of that. And in order to bring those two together, I think you need to look at informed consent, the kind of data that we're using, and ultimately the end user experience and how it's improved. The last thing I would just say is that's obviously around the consumer. For the publisher and the brands, I saw a recent study by a company called Lunio, and they did a study on invalid impressions across the web. And it's staggering that 54 billion, that's 9 zeros, was wasted last year, or 2022, sorry, on invalid impressions. That is...
Wait, what is invalid impressions?
Good question. It's an ad served to someone that isn't a human, so a bot. Only 53% of the web is human, 47% is bot traffic, and it still gets served adverts. The second thing is bot farms, not bot farms, click farms. So you have buildings in various places in the world where people build websites connected to Google AdSense, whatever, and generate adverts to generate revenue. And it's actually the second largest criminal enterprise on earth after the drugs trade is fraudulent advertising. It's mental. And then you add on to that, so I'm obviously a bit passionate about this subject, the fact that it's also equivalent to the airline industry in terms of carbon emissions. It's just incredibly inefficient. And the brands, and I think critically the agencies here, are the ones pushing out all of this nonsense and invalid and wasteful and interruptive advertising because they get paid a percentage of the ad spend, and to them it doesn't matter. So there's a number of challenges there that are not small to resolve.
Thank you. That's very interesting, and actually it opens up to lots of other topics and unintended consequences. But let's move to Niki. What's your view?
Just I actually wrote my notes here and I was thinking, right, what do users want? What would I want as a user? And it was value exchange. I actually wrote that in my notes. And I remember I was working on a technology, oh God, I think like 3 years ago or something, and it was called ViewWorks. And the whole sort of premises, but I don't think it exists now, but the whole premise behind it was to drive 100% view for the actual brand, but in exchange for data. So it would literally be the brand, offering either a discount or depending on, what brand it is. But where the value exchange would be for the full video view in exchange for the client, for the user's data. Making it a bit more interactive, and it's making it a lot more engaging. But I think that's, that there's rewarded video and things like that out there, but that's not true value, because that reward sits in that environment. You've got a user playing a game and they'll get their games. It's strong, it works, but looking at the whole sort of advertising ecosystem, it is, sort of, you need to pay. Time is commodity. So even that video view, that's it's a commodity that they're actually exchanging with the brand, which I think is really, really interesting. And then going on to like invalid impressions. So that's something I'm really, really passionate about, because again, it goes down to wastage. It goes down to, it sort of comes down to knowing, where the advertisements are literally going and how they're actually performing. And the thing is, there's no true sort of way to like come back to that unless you've got the actuals in front of you. And with data, so I worked for a data-based company, and it was quite interesting just to look at the taxonomy and how IDs were feeding into different segments, etc. But the more prominent the cookie crumbling was, sort of, it sort of almost prompted, let's say, businesses just like this particular company, as well as brands themselves, to look at their own library of first-party data. You've got brands like big as Unilever that do have wealth of data, but it's almost like, what do we do with it? Are we ready? So that potentially could be a challenge, that simply not even necessarily the publisher side, let's say, social media platforms, look, walled gardens, you've got sort of the gold there in a way, but again, that's looking at the profiles and seeing if the users are actually real there. But I'd totally be inclined to agree with Guillaume's point there, making sure that there is some sort of benefit that the user can get. But then there's a responsibility from our side as well, for working in the industry, to make sure that we are vetting supply. Brands are, even new brands are, getting credit checks against them, just to make sure that they're able actually be to run, let's say, or transact in this media world. So yeah, just going back to my point, I think right now the value isn't there when it comes to sort of open web activity, because it is a massive jungle out there. And the good news is that brands are able to see, where their spend's going, and I've seen some sort of quite eye-opening sites, especially when you've got a list of websites that are actually being targeted. So there's challenges that we've seen, and there's a lot of frustration, but I think that there's the opportunity, which we'll go into, is that hopefully we'll have more of a cleaner ecosystem and a lot more trust.
Thank you, Niki. Just one question. Do you know any research on the value exchange topic related to what consumers perceive as real value?
I came across an article, and this is again going back years ago, with the IAB, and that looked at value exchange, let's say, campaigns, and how they actually had a positive impact on the experience. So Kit Kat as a brand, don't quote me on that, please, does stand out. But there are studies done, which I need to sort of probably go back and look at, showcasing that value exchange. It does work, and the value could be planting a tree. You've got companies out there that are doing good to sort of factor out what's the bad, let's say. So that value could be a company planting a tree. It could be 30% off the next purchase. It could be, you know, I don't know if it's Netflix, for instance, a complimentary download of a film if they do X, Y, Z. So that's a massive massive sort of portfolio of possibilities there. But I think it's something that's growing. It's prominent in the gaming world more than anything, but I think that the model itself is quite clever.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Luke, what's your take on the challenges?
At Anonymised, we're exposed to both sides of the supply and demand. So we work with publishers and we work with advertisers as well. And so I can see we've got a publisher on the line just now. So I'm hoping this probably resonates. But it's data, it's audiences, right? And so, I mean, some publishers may not be as affected by the demise of the third-party cookie because they've got a great job. They're doing a great job of monetizing their own audiences. They've got first-party data, and they've got a great sales team that can go out and cut direct deals with buyers. That's fine. They may not, and they may be very heavily reliant on the monetization of their cookie-based inventory. They may be very reliant on programmatic revenues. The key thing to think about here is programmatic revenues are rent-free, right? So they're directly impacting their P&L. So that's a business critical thing that's happening with the demise of the third-party cookie because of the lack of data, because of the lack of audiences. And so on the buyer's side, it's about reach, it's about incrementality. I see we've got a big brewery on the line here. You know, Anonymised, we're working with the UK government to demonstrate that there are independent technologies outside of big tech that can still offer things like audiences, precision, reach. Because if there isn't, there's a monopoly. And we can't have that, right? There has to be a competitive, innovative ecosystem. But to buyers, like a brewery, for example, right? It's a very saturated space. And if you've only got one or two tech vendors offering the same audiences, how do you cut through? How do you reach incrementality? So yeah, audiences, monetization for publishers, huge challenge, of course, which we're helping with. For buyers, it's about reaching their audiences across a multitude of browsers, so not just Chrome, which we're talking about, but Safari's already cookieless, right? It's been cookieless for a couple of years now. So let's talk about those audiences. They're lost, they're gone. How do we reclaim them? How do we measure the impact of that reach? But working with advertisers and buyers very closely, one of the biggest challenges that we're seeing is just activations. Like when you activate a campaign at a DSP, think about all those things you pick, right? Gender, age, frequency capping. They're all cookie-based strategies. And so in the absence of third-party cookies, how do we do this targeting? So we've got a lot of muscle memory to unwind and to massage out.
And I think, like, to your point, in terms of all those being cookie-based targeting, as well as the types of clients, you know, whether they're sort of alcohol brands or beauty brands or auto brands, is sort of taking into consideration like your audience, when you're allowed to target, how you're allowed to target, and sort of looking at that. I think what I'm not scared of, but what I'm sort of conscious of is us going backwards. So how we went on to programmatic, and then it was PG guaranteed, and then in a way the buying mechanism took us back to sort of IO buying, let's say, which still happens today. And you know, contextual and behavioral were like the two sort of buzzwords. And oh gosh, I'm like going back now. This is when MPUs were like £25, and worked for Teletext Holidays actually. And I do feel that context has now or is sort of rising again. Now, how it's being traded is totally different. And that's the thing. And to your point, Luke, there's so many third parties, there's so many, especially, you know, in sort of the programmatic world, there's so many different components that come together to activate a campaign. If one of them's broken, in a way, that sort of has a knock-on effect. So it's just being able to look at the most seamless way that we can actually trade programmatically, because we will see a drop, we'll see a drop somewhere, but then we'll probably see a rise in other sort of platforms, as I mentioned. Could be like connected TV, which is a cookieless environment, as well as walled gardens. So and you know, watching the user behavior, vertical video is absolutely huge now. I know I'm going on to formats, but it's like almost like how are these users consuming media? Where are they consuming them, and when are they consuming them? And going back to that value exchange, do they want you to be associated with them, and vice versa? I love
the seamless thing is key, right? I think it's not going to be seamless for a while. As a business, we're very pro privacy because of our background. Our founder is a privacy lawyer. We work very closely with key institutes, right? So we're very much pro privacy and polarized in our view, but our view is very much like the industry has evolved from this acorn of a third-party cookie over a couple of decades. And quite simply, we've been treating personal data as a liquid commodity that can flow from vendor A to vendor B to vendor C to D to E. And we're looking at things like GDPR, right? Consent. I may have given you consent to use my personal data, but I haven't given vendor B, C, D, and E, right? So there's no such thing as umbrella consent. And so how do we move away from that? Same as control. If I want to revoke consent and reclaim my data from you, it's already gone to B, C, D, E. It's already gone down the bid stream. And that's what the third-party cookie has enabled people to do, right? Stitch, share, and trade personal data. So we think that it's going to need a bit of a reform. It's going to need a shake-up, and we're going to have to work from the bottom up for that. So seamless is what we're working towards, but I think we've got some work to do.
I think it's a great point, Luke, that you just mentioned, that there should be some kind of reform or rethinking. And listening to you, I was just thinking about if it's a step back, going back to the, I don't know, 90s or so, or hopefully, because we all believe in innovation, and that's why we are here, because we know that there are alternatives, and obviously it's not just you, but we are proud to have some representatives of this new wave, we believe. So the question is how to move on, and what do you think companies, brands, and publishers should do in order to keep effectiveness and monetization opportunities as much as possible, and at the same time living these new values? Luke, would you like to start?
Yeah. So, sorry, is this about advice moving forward?
Yeah, and still, if you see any opportunities in general, what the industry, publishers and brands have in general, and obviously you can speak about your approach, not your company specific, but what this new wave of privacy focused tech solutions might mean, and why they are good where they are, if they are good enough in terms of quantity or not. I've got lots of questions. I don't want to.
Of course, we're pro privacy, so we're saying from an opportunity point of view, look at new solutions that are doing something brand new, built from the ground up. I appreciate to someone working at a holdco or an independent or a brand looking to activate and reach audiences, they've got to hedge their bets. So I think there's some interesting solutions out there that are maybe creating new walled gardens. The fact that we're talking about rich data in the fintech space on this call today is quite compelling. It's quite an interesting data set for brands to tap into. I think looking at things like clean rooms, where we are leveraging first-party data in a possibly more compliant way. We could argue both sides of the coin maybe in that. But there are solutions out there that are maybe rethinking how we've done things previously, not overhauling it, but things like clean rooms, data matching, looking at new walled gardens, I think is quite interesting. And so we should be testing those. Then looking at new gen solutions that are built from the ground up like, of course, Anonymised.
What do you mean by new walled gardens?
I think there's new media solutions, new technical solutions that are building ecosystems where consumers are happy to share their data, and their data stays within that environment. It isn't shared out of that. So maybe walled gardens aren't the best term, but there are new environments in which foster rich data in a compliant, privacy-first way.
Right, I see. Thanks. Guillaume, would you like to continue?
Yeah, sure. I mean, ultimately, we're in that category, right? The new from the ground up platform that rethinks a little bit how to do it. And I really want to pick up on Luke's point about the consumer being happy to share the data. All the research we did ahead of me selling my house and quitting my job showed that actually consumers will share their data. I'm not sure privacy is the challenge. The challenge is the value exchange that we've been discussing. And to the point that, our platform is very explicit. You share 36 months, 3 years of your ingoing and outgoing transactions directly from your bank account. And the reason they do that is to get adverts that are directly rewarding or special offers, whatever, that must be relevant. It's don't buy things you don't typically enjoy or like, right? And so if a brand wants access to you, they have to give you a reward that is fair value, but they don't get your data. And I think this is the really key point. The data stays within our ecosystem. Our AI engine calculates the value of any unique individual's attention to a specific brand or offer, and they get sent that they get sent it currently to our app, tomorrow to something a bit different, but we won't go into that. And that whole ecosystem, I think, can serve all the challenges that we're discussing here, including ensuring that the publisher provides a better user experience to their users, whilst not having to cause the headaches with dealing with data or maybe even selling, because you can provide a direct access to the right consumer at the right time based on the data that they're happy to share. So, but having said that, 100% of publishing executives or media executives we've spoken to haven't heard of open banking. And that for me has been the big revelation that, have you seen the Experian Boost Your Credit Score advert? Oh yeah, I've seen that. The first thing you have to do is connect your bank account. And guess what? Your data is being packaged and anonymized and sold off. And then you get 3 extra points on your credit score. That's a value exchange. But that's open banking. And it's regulated, it's mandated, and it's secure. Yeah, so it's certainly the learning curve for us has been, in terms of learning more about the media world, but equally the media world learning more about fintech, has been much steeper, much more difficult, and much more challenging than I thought it would be. Because my assumption was, if you're a beer brand, why don't you want to talk to people who go to the pub every day? Right, and I know who they are. I know how much they spend at the pub, how much of the percentage of their income they spend in the pub, when they last got paid, when they're next going to get paid, based on the 3 years of their behavior. And people are a bit funny about that, weirdly, because you shared the data. Oh, how did you get this? Is it legal? Yeah, it's regulated. Anyway, so I'll get off my soapbox. But yeah, that's what we think.
Yeah, thank you. I think this open data usage is a very, very interesting innovation that we see in other industries as well. For some reason, the advertising market is not that experienced in this, but you will change this. So let's move to Niki. And
yeah, so I think the main thing is, like I said, we don't want to go backwards. I'd say being dynamic and adaptable in a way, which, look, our industry, especially the digital industry, we've got to note that the changes are happening across the digital industry. Looking at brands that have, let's say, a publisher in a way could be a brand because they are within their own right, in a way, right? So if you like looking at brands and looking at publishers, I'm just going to put them in that bracket for now, but looking at how and understanding how your activity is actually dovetailing with another, how it actually lends itself to one another, take advantage and do research on emerging technologies that are there to genuinely help solve short-term as well as longer-term problems, rather than relying heavily on DV360, relying heavily on walled garden platforms because you feel safe there. The thing is, it's about the longevity of data. It's about the longevity of the actual user, the person, and how they're actually operating. A person will have different, I'd say, behavior within a walled garden environment than they would across a publisher site there. I'd definitely say that value exchange is really, really, it is definitely important, but more than anything is really helping the advertiser, the brand, understand like how their activity is working against their own KPIs, against their own internal goals, and so really sort of marrying that up. Playground XYZ, that's an attention-based company, so it doesn't actually touch the cookie world or PII world, which is an advantage there. But it does do even just the attention industry or ecosystem within the industry, that really helps hone in for both publishers, both publishers and advertisers on like how hard their advertisements actually working, if the user's actually paying attention to it or not, is it worth it, how much investment. So this lends itself back to the internal sort of workings of the company, to editorial, to the creative teams, etc. So you're able to really understand the true cost of actually operating in the digital world for that particular brand. I would definitely say the key point for me would be definitely test. Don't be afraid to test. Also work closer and closely as you can with supply partners, as well as sort of closing the loop rather than working separately and in silos, because that's where we get lost in translation. That's where we see drop-offs and massive discrepancies. Yeah, and just to share information. I think information sharing, not data, but just industry information is really, really key. It's really important. And that's the way that we're going to learn from one another, I think.
Thank you, Niki. We need to wrap up soon, this public part at least. So I would like to ask one sentence from every one of you that would be your advice to the others, and then we move to the conversational part. Niki, would you start?
Of course. What would my advice be? I'd say, don't worry. It's easy for me to say don't worry. It's just ensure when it comes to the data point and part, make sure you do have your teams internally really sort of understanding what that data is, how old it is, relevancy, and ways to sort of not even safeguard it, but just ensure that you understand who your actual user is. I would say just generally test and learn. I think learning is really, really important, and work with, I'd say, like few trusted partners more than anything, because that way you're able to learn much more about yourselves as a brand, as well as the growth around you, and you're not just spreading yourself thinly, and then there's less chance of wastage and essentially putting a user off. So I'd say that would be my advice.
Thank you, Niki. Guillaume, please.
I think Niki covered a lot of what I would have said, but I think the key here for me is, whether you're a brand or a publisher, put yourself in your users or potential customers' shoes and think about the end experience that you're serving to them, and whether or not that is one that you would like to be served. Because in my experience, as I've been sort of saying throughout this session, most of it is frustrating. You're ultimately waiting for the skip button to turn on. All of that. As far as all the challenges we've discussed around data and everything else, lots of people working on this challenge. I hope this isn't another year where Google will push it back. It sounds like they're finally implementing it, and we're going for it this time. Yeah, and I think don't spread yourself too thinly, and work with a few key partners that really focus on delivering a valuable experience to humans, which isn't all that obvious to do on the web.
Thank you, Guillaume. And Luke, please.
Yeah, cookies are going. We're all in, non-stop. as Niki mentioned, it is about testing. I would say to the people that I'm speaking to in agencies and at Brands Direct, that the challenge isn't what's going to give you the best results. It's more what's going to remain compliant and feasible as a long-term solution. And so not just test, but understand why cookies are going. What makes this new solution a privacy-first solution and will remain compliant, not in 2 months, but in 2 years. That's the key thing, right? Because look, buyers, publishers, they're not sure of cookieless solutions. But I think if we can really understand, why cookies are going, what I need to do to make sure I do remain compliant, then we're going to be putting our best foot forward. Look, that there's solutions out there that leverage signals. For example, IP address may be one of those signals, but we know IP addresses are being turned off. And so it might seem viable as a solution to us now. And it is a great time to test now because we've got cookieless environments and cookieless browsers and still an abundance of third-party cookies. But that signal-based solution may work now, but it may not be feasible for you in 6 months' time. So the task at hand isn't what's going to give me the best results now, but also what's going to remain compliant. So do your homework, do your own due diligence, and hedge your bets accordingly.
Thank you, Luke. I'm